When you think of bad games companies, or at least games companies that have lost their touch in recent years, I'm sure a few spring to mind.
So what we did was we sat down and we said, okay, now every time you have to make a decision, every time you sift through some level of information, or you have to try and think about how to move some initiative forward, ask yourself this question first. Is this good for the player? 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 No!
Maybe you ponder back to a time when Activision wasn't known for being more greedy than Moneybags from Spyro.
Or not, I'm afraid there is a small fee to open the bridge. Is a small fee. Is a small fee. Is a small fee. Is a small fee.
Or maybe you think back to when Blizzard knew how to keep it in their pants. Too much? Sorry, my bad, but it's true. But I'm sure a fair share of you thought of Ubisoft, a company that has truly brought so much good to the games industry through innovation and true passion and love for the games they worked on, to now an out-of-touch, broken shell of a company that blames their fans for the mistakes that they make. But today I want to take you down the good path. I want to take you to the blue pill, some may call it. As today I'm going to be talking about the rise of Ubisoft and seeing why they were once so good. Before I continue with this video, the algorithm wants me to tell you that 90% of you are not subscribed, so please subscribe so I can make more money. The original founders of Ubisoft were 5 brothers who came from the most loved country in the world, France.
You French pig!
I'm now going to attempt to pronounce their names for you so I can sound very professional and sound like I did a lot of research into this video. Brackets, I'm dyslexic.
This might be hard to believe, but are you aware that nobody gives a shit?
You have Michael Guillemot, Claude Guillemot, Gerald Guillemot, and Christian Guillemot. And, Uvies Guillemot. Oh, so sorry. It's okay, they're French, they'll get over it. The 5 men were originally into agriculture, however they saw potential in the gaming industry in 1986, so decided to give it a go. So in 1986, Ubisoft would be officially formed. In the year of 1986, Ubisoft managed to gain access to both Nintendo and Sega platforms to launch games on. It's interesting looking back and seeing that even back in 1986, Ubisoft were launching their games on the top consoles. This helped them be able to reach a very wide majority of people to entertain, but also so that they could make the most amount of profits possible. Of course, this also meant that their games would be seen as the most impressive technologically, as at the time, their games would be launching on the 2 consoles, or rather platforms, that ran the games industry. Within that fine year of 1986, Ubisoft released their first game, and it was a pop culture game.
What's your spirit animal?
Tupac Shakur.
No, I'm not shitting you, it was literally a game where you answered pop culture questions and relevant questions about the 80s. So while it wasn't the most engaging or fun game of all time, we can start to see how Ubisoft were putting their graphics through the power of their consoles to great use already. But this game is not what put Ubisoft on the map. Oh no, because that would be coming a little bit later on. And by the way, if this wasn't their first game, then it was one of their first, because they have a lot of things that come up that says it's their first game when you search what's Ubisoft's first game. In 1995, Ubisoft would release a game called Rayman, which would be their big breakthrough in the gaming industry. Rayman greatly improved the gaming industry with its incredibly fun gameplay and challenging level design. It released on the PC, the PS1, and sold over 3 million copies. To this day, it's one of the most sold games on the PS1.
Oh man, now that looks good.
I can't stop winning!
Rayman truly was amazing. The art was unique and the music sound was great. But where it stood out was in the level design and the enemy design, and in its fun challenge that not a lot of platformers at the time really offered. Players would really have to take the time to remember enemy patterns and level layouts. This was Ubisoft creating some of their best work. The gameplay was fun, dynamic, which not many other games were able to do. Some even call Rayman a masterpiece, and you can see why, with how much it truly innovated for the time. But you see, their luck didn't just stop there. Ubisoft would then go on to make the original Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six. This game was revolutionary, and some could argue that in the ripe old age of 1998, it was somewhat of a pioneer of the tactical shooter genre, and arguably less toxic than the Rainbow Six we have now.
kill him, I'll give you money. How much? What's the bounty on me team killing this guy and looking at his reaction? $5? Too low. This is a special gamer right here.
Come on, guys, we gotta go.
What is it? 200k GP. We're talking in GP, I'm on it.
Stop fucking shooting me! What the fuck is wrong with you? Chill!
There was a misinput, calm down! You calm the fuck down! There was a misinput!
The original Rainbow Six launched on Microsoft Windows, the Nintendo, and the PlayStation 1. The 90s were a great time for Ubisoft. They made many games, and you could already argue that they pioneered one genre of game that is still active to this day in the industry. But how would they look moving into the 2000s? The start of the 2000s would see Ubisoft grow massively, launching even more titles than they did during their 90s career. In 2000, they even made a follow-up game to their extremely successful Rain Man game. Wait, hold up, they even made a Batman game, let's go. In 2003, Prince of Persia Sands of Time would launch, a 3D platformer where the player could manipulate time. This, even to this day, is so cool. To this day, very few games have ever delved into manipulating time as a gameplay feature, and at the time, this only pushed Ubisoft forward in terms of reputation and public image. The game itself was just great, and it's clear that people who made it clearly cared about their product and their end result. Sands of Time would release for the original Xbox, the PC, and even the PlayStation, further cementing Ubisoft as a company that played all sides and was a friend to every gamer's platform. The game's gameplay was smooth, fun, and incredible, and the level design rocked. Sands of Time, in the end, after their many sequels, would sell in total over 20 million copies. This game was revolutionary, and this series was incredible. Also mention that both Splinter Cell came out in the early 2000s and Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon, which also just created so many more fans for stealth genres of games within Ubisoft. Also, two just absolutely great games. Now I want to talk about the release of Far Cry 1, because in my opinion, Ubisoft has three main game series, those series being Far Cry, Assassin's Creed, and Watch Dogs. And in the beautiful year of 2004, Far Cry would be born. Far Cry's birth, it was very simple. It was a fun, wacky game about blowing up and shooting whatever got in your way. While the game, looking back, really wasn't anything amazingly special, it did sell really well, which meant that they could milk the absolute shit out of it. Do you guys remember me talking about Prince of Persia Sands of Time? Well, basically they remade that series and called it Assassin's Creed, and it was a hit. Yeah, in case you didn't know, the original Assassin's Creed was actually supposed to be a follow-up spin-off game of Sands of Time universe. This idea, however, was scrapped, and instead it was made into its own IP, hence Assassin's Creed being born.
How's this good, mate?
It's beautiful!
The first Assassin's Creed game was a major hit because mainly no one in the industry had ever done something like it before. The game looked absolutely beautiful, had great combat, an amazing story, and some fun and awesome parkour. The game, even though dated by our standards, would be a huge success at the time, and it would spawn Ubisoft's arguably most beloved game saga of all time, the Ezio saga. Throughout the 2000s, each Assassin's Creed game that launched was a great improvement from the last one in nearly every factor. To this day, my favourite Assassin's Creed game is Revelations, the last Ezio game which came out in 2011. Revelations, for example, the game improves the puzzles, the parkour, the game's overall gameplay. The original Assassin's Creed series was almost, or maybe was, a masterpiece, and this is what really threw Ubisoft into the good public eye of gamers. These games were absolutely fantastic. They were fairly priced, and once more, they were on every single console that could possibly host them. Further just cementing Ubisoft as not only a company that made games with pride and care, but also a company you could trust and pick no sides. This also caused Ubisoft to be known as the guys who made really good open world games, because as you would know, all the Assassin's Creed games were open world. This was also when their gameplay was highlighted to be the best in the industry because of their innovation through things such as high points in games and side activities. The same things that people look at now and dread Ubisoft.
No.
In 2008, Far Cry 2 would be released. This would be one of Ubisoft's most important releases. The game was known for being a hard, realistic, unforgiving first-person shooter. In Far Cry 2, the player faces many difficulties, such as fighting the entirety of Africa's ecosystem, hostile factions in the game. Oh yeah, and I nearly forgot, crippling malaria.
Damn, I'm looking good.
Now, why was Far Cry 2 so important? Well, it did things no other game company did at the time, and this was very important for Ubisoft because in 2008, no other game company seemed to be innovating just like Ubisoft. You got to remember as well, by this time Ubisoft had already created 2 standalone, incredible experiences through series of games, those series being Sands of Time and Assassin's Creed. 2 game series only other companies could wish to get their hands on. Not only that, but Ubisoft, by releasing Far Cry 2, have shown that now they can do first-person shooters and do them well, much like they can the many other genres of games they were doing throughout the 2000s. Okay, but if I'm saying they've already done first-person shooters before in other games, then why does Far Cry 2 matter? Well, it's all about innovation, and Far Cry 2 innovated in ways that no other game series or games company ever had. Just looking at Far Cry 2 as a standalone first-person shooter, it was rapidly different to anything else in the industry. It was different in a way that attracted so many first-person shooter fans over to Far Cry, which meant that so many first-person shooter fans now had faith in Ubisoft. Far Cry 2 was once more another open world game, which further only cemented Ubisoft as a company that excellently specialized in making great open worlds. Far Cry 2 was incredible for its little details, and it was so advanced in terms of its combat and health system, it's still praised to this day. In 2012, Ubisoft's beloved Assassin's Creed trilogy would end. Well, at least the Ezio saga would end anyway. But this wouldn't matter. In 2012, Ubisoft would release Far Cry 3, and in my opinion, this was Ubisoft at their absolute peak. But not because of the reasons you might think. I don't think that Far Cry 3 is Ubisoft's best game, by any means, but what I do think is that it's very important for Ubisoft's development as a company and the direction they moved in after its release. When you ask Ubisoft fans what their favourite Ubisoft game was, a lot of them might say, and not all of them, but a lot of them might say Far Cry 3. And why was this?
But why? Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
Far Cry 3 had arguably one of the best villains in gaming, a great story, a great open world, but none of this actually matters, I don't think anyway. Or at least it doesn't matter in terms of the reason why people look back at Far Cry 3 so fondly. You see, Ubisoft, when creating Far Cry 3, also created something else that was very important that I call the Ubisoft Formula. And the Ubisoft Formula is very interesting. The Ubisoft Formula is as follows: a large open world, points of high place the player will have to climb to either reveal more of the map to the player or show the player cool and interesting things within the map, and finally, last but certainly not least, gang territories / outposts the player can take. When the player does any of these things, of course, he will be rewarded with either upgrade points or, in some Ubisoft titles, money.
I'm here for money. Money.
Now, sure, you could argue points of high place and gang outposts / territories were introduced in Assassin's Creed, but they weren't refined. It was in Far Cry 3 where they were really refined. Now, when I say all this, a modern Ubisoft fan might shriek in terror, but remember, back in these days, this was great innovation, and this was the best of the best for Ubisoft. And I would be a liar if I was going to say the formula back then didn't work, because it did work and it was great. These things, this formula is what made so many people addicted to Far Cry 3 and many other Ubisoft games both in the past and then further in the future. This was true innovation at the time, and it really did set Ubisoft's reputation as the badass open world games company, but only time would tell how this formula would age. Overall, the 2000s were great for Ubisoft. In fact, they were Ubisoft's golden era. This would be the last time Ubisoft truly got great praise and love. Throughout the 2000s, Ubisoft truly made some incredible games. But unfortunately, going into the mid-2010s, this would begin to change, and change for the worse.
It's really a collaborative effort. It's a great experience. I feel very lucky and humbled to do this and to be involved with this team.
In 2013, Assassin's Creed Black Flag would launch, and in my opinion this would be the last time Ubisoft truly got an 100% great response for something they released. Assassin's Creed Black Flag to this day is the greatest pirate game of all time, despite Ubisoft's best attempts in recent years to recaptivate that sort of game.
Holy Jesus. What is that? What the fuck is that?
But not only was it the best pirate game of all time and still is, but some people even call it the best Assassin's Creed game of all time. I don't really have much to say on this game because how do I say anything about the game without repeating what every other person has already said about it? Yeah, the game was great, and once more, it truly felt like Ubisoft could just not be beaten. In the year of 2014, Ubisoft would release my personal favourite game they ever made, that game being Watch Dogs 1. Watch Dogs 1 is truly great from a story point of view, a world point, and even, especially, a gameplay perspective. I love this game so much, it truly holds a special place in my heart, but it is the first game that got some major backlash when it first released. Now you might be wondering what this major backlash was over, but I can tell you now it was over nothing that was actually in the game itself, but more what was not in the game that people thought they were going to have in the game. To many gamers, the E3 Watch Dogs 1 showcase is extremely famous. Much like many prior trailers to Watch Dogs 1 that Ubisoft had released, the E3 trailer / showcase shown Watch Dogs 1 to have the best, utmost impressive graphics the industry had ever seen. Not to mention, the showcase showed some extremely in-depth detail that was going into Watch Dogs 1. And then Watch Dogs 1 released, and for the first time Ubisoft had been caught out, and caught out bad. Watch Dogs 1's graphics did not look like what was shown in the E3 trailer, and the amount of detail and polish that was shown was also not in Watch Dogs 1's release. Fans were rightfully quite annoyed at this, and some of them even felt a bit let down. Now, I'm not about to tell you that Watch Dogs 1 didn't sell well, because it absolutely sold incredibly, but it did start some skepticism around people and Ubisoft games trailers. And speaking of trailers not delivering what they're promising on, this would start a trend within Ubisoft's trailers and game marketing community, a trend that they would never ever truly be able to stop. But why did this happen? Why did Ubisoft all of a sudden think they could get away with this sort of deception of their fans? The truth is, and I don't think anyone else truly knows why Ubisoft thinks that missing pieces of their game should be placed into a trailer which never made it into the game's release. Did Ubisoft think they would be able to implement these lacking or missing features in time for the game's release? But this would seem to not add up, as why would they continue to make this mistake? This seems like something you would only make a mistake on once. Throughout their coming titles and projects, they would continue to advertise pieces of their games that never actually made it into their game. But if these were honest mistakes, then why did they continue to happen over and over and over again? Maybe in the case of Watch Dogs 1, they thought they would be able to get away with a couple bits of missing graphical content and a couple bits of missing detail, but this seemed oddly out of character for Ubisoft at the time, considering just how much detail and care they seemed to put into their older titles. Or maybe, just maybe, the devs had gotten more lazy and thought they could truly deceive their fans without them actually being able to do anything and have any consequences, because Watch Dogs 1 proved that they could leave things out of a game and it still sell incredibly well. Truth is, we will never really know, but these lies from trailers would not stop after this point, and it looked like the start of a new, more lazy Ubisoft. Far Cry 4 also came out in 2014 and overall was quite a good game, but this is where the second issue of Ubisoft titles would come in. This issue would be the same game syndrome, aka the Ubisoft formula turned basically to mush. Remember when I spoke about how great and innovative the Ubisoft formula was? Well, yeah, that would kind of come back to bite them in the ass in the end, and it all started in 2014, mainly with Watch Dogs and Far Cry 4. Like I said before, Far Cry 4 was and still is a great game, but it had a problem. In terms of gameplay, Far Cry 4 basically just had Far Cry 3's gameplay, except a shit karma system that was added and also an extra story mode that was added.
Okay.
This meant that basically throughout the whole game you were clearing outposts and taking towers, much like you were in Far Cry 3. Only in Far Cry 3 it was a new system, so it was exciting, but in Far Cry 4 it's the exact same system. And to me personally, this was the first major sign that Ubisoft were starting to get seriously lazy. Once more, in the same year of 2014, Assassin's Creed Unity would drop, which, like I said, for both Far Cry 4 and Watch Dogs 1 was not a bad game. However, I can't stress enough, the game felt and played exactly like an older Assassin's Creed game. There was nothing really new here. Just to let you know, I think that Unity was an absolutely great game overall, and it did add a lot of new and cool stuff, but I'm just going with the general consensus that Ubisoft fans and players thought at the time. And if we're being really fair, it didn't really add a whole lot of new content that fans were really looking for, especially coming off of the back end of Assassin's Creed Black Flag, which was, as you all know, is a fan favorite. In my opinion, 2014 really seemed to be the turning point for Ubisoft. Ubisoft had made so much money from the 2000s, and they clearly found a formula that kept fans interested. I mean, it almost seemed like Ubisoft just completely did a 180 and switched as a company. From a company that clearly took pride in their work and strived for innovation, to a company that had simply found a formula that worked and realized they didn't need to put any more efforts into their games because they had a formula that worked, so why would they? And like I said, by this time they had already made shitloads of money. Effort wasn't needed. Now I want to talk about Ubisoft in 2015 onwards, because I think it's here where they truly hit rock bottom in my opinion. I think this because it was at this time when Ubisoft fully turned to relying on their formula to basically sell their games for them. All their Assassin's Creed games were basically just big open world maps that were more bloated and fat than the last thing Pyrocynical decided to jerk off to.
Got my shit, okay. Yep. And then... Oh,
The actual Assassin's Creed games, funnily enough, weren't really even Assassin's Creed games, and also they were so similar gameplay-wise to each other. Travel 7,000 miles across the other side of the map, climb a tall tower, look around, and then take an enemy outpost. Repeat this in every single game for about 10,000 hours, and then you've completed them all. Any new project they did was basically just a reboot of an old game they've already fucking got, and then every time they rebooted a game, they'd fuck it up. In terms of trailers, this was when they were scamming the most amount of people, saying and showing one thing and then doing the complete opposite, or just not having that thing they shown in the game. They would release the Rainbow Six Siege that we have to this day, and they would kill it in about 2 years to the pile of dog shit that it is in the current state. Now, not everything was bad for Ubisoft in this time. They did have some hidden gems in there, like Watch Dogs 2 and even Far Cry 5.
Found Cheeseburger. As long as he's with you, I know he's safe. Just remember, don't actually feed him cheeseburgers, because, you know, he's got the diabetes.
And also, it's important to note that Ubisoft at this time were still making money. I mean, 2015 to 2020, they were still making a large majority of money and still making profits from their games. I mean, a lot of you might be asking, why was this such a rapid and fast change so quickly? Well, to be honest with you, one, I don't think it was as fast as people think. Yes, in 2014 something rapidly changed. Ubisoft began to put out more lying-like trailers and their games began to lose that little bit of polish, but remember, still, they were making decent games. I mean, take the shoddy Assassin's Creed games I was talking about. A lot of people actually enjoyed them, though they were fat, bloated messes, they were still okay games. What I think happened was that a lot of the original Ubisoft staff simply left, disappeared, had enough money and cleared off. I mean, you can't really blame those guys. They had made it big and they expected their humongous company to now be able to cope with the amount of games they were taking on and producing. And the company could cope. It just found a way to cope that involved a lot less work, being lazy, using the Ubisoft formula, and lying to your fans through trailers. And though through the mid-2010s the games would continue to be okay, the further and more games Ubisoft released, the worse they would get and the more lazy they would get. And though Ubisoft titles were still selling exponentially well, this would all change very quickly for a few major reasons. Watch Dogs 2 had done incredibly well, so logically Ubisoft wanted to make a third game, and a third game was made. But not what fans had expected. This was not a big open world American Watch Dogs game where you could play as a badass hacker. Oh no, this was a game that for some reason decided to switch the entire settings of Watch Dogs to London and then also set it in the future when no other game had been set in the future, and then also made it so you could play as any character you wanted to in the open world. Oh, and you could also hack, but the hacking was severely dumbed down and kinda shit.
Time to power down.
It was literally so alien from the rest of the series. The game was basically ass, and a large group of Ubisoft fans were Watch Dogs fans, waiting for the epic release of their sequel to Watch Dogs 2. And what they got couldn't have been a further competitor. This pretty much instantly killed the Watch Dogs IP and led many Ubisoft fans who had faith in Ubisoft to deliver a strong, well-done Watch Dogs 3 to completely abandon Watch Dogs and Ubisoft as a whole. This, I would say, was Ubisoft's first series killer. They had killed the series with the release of Watch Dogs 3, and I don't think there's anything they could do to revive it. Like, why the fuck was it set in the future, man? Come on. Far Cry 6 came out in 2021 and was a big fat mess. It was coming off of one of Ubisoft's most financially successful games, Far Cry 5, but just like Watch Dogs 3, it would not live up to its predecessors. Far Cry 6 was a big, bloated, open world mess, full of nothing burger missions, nothing burger characters, and completed with a topping of nothing burger villains. The game sucked, and while Far Cry 5 was not my favourite in the series, I can see why a lot of Far Cry fans and Far Cry 5 fans were very disappointed with this complete mess of a game. I can almost see Ubisoft's thought process when making Far Cry 6. They were like, hey, what went well when making Far Cry 5? And then Smith in the corner responded with, well, we changed it up quite a bit. You see, in Far Cry 5, the map's quite different, there are 3 villains you can face at any given point, and we completely changed the upgrade system. And then you had like the fucking CEO of Ubisoft listen to him, and he was like, oh damn, you changed a lot of shit? Let's do it all again, but let's change the good stuff with shit, piss and win.
Truth or lies?
The truth, of course.
And just like that, Far Cry fans were gone, leaving Ubisoft behind in sad disappointment and frustration. Both the Far Cry and the Watch Dogs fanbase has never, and I don't think ever will, recover from their last game's release. Assassin's Creed Mirage was supposed to be a promise to Assassin's Creed fans that the series would be finally returning to its roots, but in 2023, when the game released, it was far from a return to the roots. And at this point, I'm sure you've guessed it, the game sucked ass. Assassin's Creed Mirage pissed off a lot of fans, much like the other 2 games I just mentioned, but why am I talking about these 3 games in particular? Well, it's important, because in my eyes, these 3 core groups of fans are what makes up Ubisoft buyers. And Ubisoft didn't quite know it yet, but they had just fully lost support out of 2 of the 3 groups of fans. Those 2 fan bases being the Far Cry fanbase and the Watch Dogs fanbase, and the Assassin's Creed fanbase was quickly dwindling fast. Now, in my opinion, 2024, this current year, is the year where Ubisoft has pretty much died as a company, and let me tell you why. How Ubisoft works is because they're such a large company and they have to focus on multiple different games at a time, they split their company into teams. So the projects Ubisoft were working on for 2024 were Skull and Bones, Star Wars Outlaws, and depending on who you asked, Avatar or Assassin's Creed Shadows. But why was this year such a failure? Well, let me tell you why. People stopped believing in Ubisoft's lies and simply stopped buying. Skull and Bones came out at the start of this year and currently speaking has sold around 850,000 copies. And for a AAA company, I cannot stress enough how this is not good. And when I say not good, I mean this is like make no money not good. It's rumored that Skull and Bones costed around 850 million to make, which is an insane amount. The most important thing to take from this release is that it was in development for 8 years and costed 850 million to make. And this time releasing a half-polished shoddy game, they made no money. In fact, they minused money. It's clear that fans have just left Ubisoft behind and they're not buying into their shitty lies anymore. Now, I think that Ubisoft, even though they probably knew that they lost a lot of money from Skull and Bones, were banking on Star Wars Outlaws doing well. Because it's fucking Star Wars, how is it gonna fail? Literally everything that's sold, good or bad, from Star Wars normally makes a profit. But newsflash, this one did in fact not make a profit. It released a month ago and it did not sell well. This was bad. Sure, Avatar had done okay, but Skull and Bones and Star Wars Outlaws, 2 both new IPs, had done terribly financially for Ubisoft, and this hurt Ubisoft stocks for the first time ever. Like I said before, Ubisoft's team was split, so the team that made Avatar joined to finish up propping up and making Skull and Bones. They then shit themselves when that game sold terribly, and so have now the team that made Star Wars Outlaws. Not only did the game not sell well, but it doesn't help that the game itself launched as a buggy mess once again and wasn't very good anyway, so it wasn't doing itself any favours. It was at this point that Ubisoft knew they had to do something, so they released a trailer for Assassin's Creed Shadows, and while this did generate some hype, it would not be enough, as they would release a statement not long after saying the game would be coming out in this year, delaying the game, basically saying that there's not enough players to support the game, or they don't even think enough people will buy the game in the first place. As of current state, we know that the game is supposed to be releasing next year, but whether the game will actually be released, we have no idea. This led one of the head figures at Ubisoft to put out a statement blaming fans for not buying their shitty games, and thus, that leaves Ubisoft in the current day's state. In conclusion, I don't know the future of Ubisoft. I know that their rise was one of revolution in the industry, and I know that their downfall was one of complete sadness and laziness. But as for where they go from here, I simply don't know. I don't even know if we're getting Assassin's Creed Shadows, and as far as I'm personally aware, no other big projects are in development or have been announced. But we will have to simply wait and see, as only time will tell if Ubisoft can save themselves through the innovation that rise them to popularity, or if maybe, just maybe, they will die on their lazy shield of dead old game formulas and open world messes. Thank you guys ever so much for the support and the love for all my content, and I really appreciate if you've made it to the end of the video, if you'd give the video a subscribe. I really appreciate every single one of you, and I thank you all for sticking around to the end. Uploads have been very slow, I apologise for this. I'll be trying to get a video from now out once every week. Leave a comment down below what you think the true rise in Ubisoft was, and where you think they rise to their peak and fell to their peak. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Stay safe guys. Peace.